Here come the drums. Welcome to the Mark Peterson Show. This is your host, Mark Anthony Peterson, and this is the podcast where you get news and views from a Blackish point of view. Welcome to 2020. And already we are off to a start that is scaring the hell out of me. Right here in my hands is an article that says that the U.S. has started as of today collecting DNA on all inbound immigrants. Yeah, DNA. They are criminalizing immigrants by collecting their DNA, something that has never been done. Yeah, DNA. Let me tell you a little bit more about what they're doing. Anybody entering the country, particularly countries south of the United States, ages 14 to 79, they will collect a DNA sample, and that DNA sample will be stored in the FBI database. And those records will be kept indefinitely. Now, for those of you who don't know a lot about the FBI database, this is an area where I've spent a great chunk of my career. The FBI database is called CODIS. And CODIS, C-O-D-I-S, stands for Combined DNA Index System. And the FBI has one. Most states have a DNA database. Some cities and even local municipalities have databases. Now, all of these databases, like the FBI fingerprint database, is indexed and stored so they can be searched whenever you are looking for a potential suspect. For those of you who don't know, the kind of genesis behind all of this started when sexual-related crimes where there was no suspect, but DNA evidence was left behind. It was kind of the impetus for building this database. And so DNA samples were being collected by taking a swab out of the suspect's mouth, and data was stored nationally with the FBI in this CODIS system. States soon followed thereafter, with some leaders like California and Virginia being out on the leading edge collecting hundreds of thousands of DNA rape kits in their systems. And then back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the FBI started trying to organize the effort to make sure that everyone was collecting the same type of data, indexing it the same way, and making it searchable so that you would have truly a nationwide system, both FBI and state in unison. And then there were a layer of laws that were passed to kind of protect privacy, put procedures around how the data would be managed, much again like the FBI fingerprint database. Now, since the development of all of this, rape kits have been collected, with the thought that you would either find the suspect or exonerate someone. But it hadn't worked the way you think it should have worked. Because according to InTheBacklog.com, there's anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 kits that have not been processed. Which means individuals who may have been arrested in a potential rape cannot be proven innocent with that data that's stored in the CODIS system. Many of you have seen some of the high-profile cases where Oprah has gone in and paid for a kit to be analyzed, and individuals have actually been exonerated. Unfortunately, the majority of those people in those cases have been people of color who've spent years, decades in prison for crimes they did not commit. So the CODIS system was designed for those types of crimes, and then it gradually graduated into collecting crimes on felonies, and that was spearheaded by individuals in Virginia to get more data on felonies outside of just sexual-related crimes. Now, privacy advocates at the time had momentum and were pushing back against that sort of scope creep. But after 9/11, all of that was washed away and the scope creep has continued. Now look at where we are. If your local news didn't run that story, it should tell you something. Collecting DNA samples on people who have not committed a crime and storing it indefinitely is saying that we are on a path to something very scary in this country. Very scary. Now, back in 2019, the FBI cracked a crime with the Golden Gate Killer after 60 years of looking for him by searching one of the DNA sites like Ancestry and all the other guys. They went in and found DNA from one of his relatives and used that to track down the potential killer because they had a profile that they were looking for. That profile allowed them to narrow down the search, find family members, and then match the DNA and track him down using a commercial system. So, what are they doing? Why are they doing it? And who's next? For those of you who don't pay attention to these things, there's a reason behind it. There's a reason why Google is in Africa using every means necessary to collect DNA on Africans who don't want their DNA collected. They're working through third-party organizations who, in some cases, are going so far as to trade support and medicines for DNA samples. There are other cases that have been unearthed where the individuals who provided blood didn't even know they were giving a DNA sample that was being turned over to some of those DNA collectors. Because right now, for the most part, the biggest pool of DNA that hasn't been collected on the planet are the people in Africa. And let me tell you why that's important. And important for you to understand. How many of you know the story of Henrietta-Lacks? Oprah brought this story to the forefront when she portrayed Deborah Lacks, the daughter of Henrietta-Lacks. But let me tell you about her story. She died in 1951 after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of cervical cancer. Johns Hopkins did the diagnosis, and after she passed, they took some of those cancer cells. And typically what happens when they extract the cells is that those cells die. Well, guess what? Henrietta's cells did not die. They started to grow. Yeah, outside of her body. They grew after they were extracted. So when they realized that, they realized they had something very special. They took Henrietta's cells and they used them to do some incredible stuff with. They tested the polio vaccine. They developed in vitro fertilization using those cells. And several drugs, chemotherapy drugs, using those cells. So you would think Henrietta's family would be well off after a sample of her body, the cells from her body, were taken and used to create all of these fantastic drugs, saving millions of lives. And you would be wrong if you thought that. They got paid nothing. They weren't even notified that they still had her sample and were using it to create drugs. Now, Johns Hopkins claims they never profited from the use of her cells. But we do know, even though they haven't released any of their internal documents regarding this issue, that millions of dollars exchanged hand from the culturing and selling of those cells to dozens of other agencies that have created more drugs internationally. And here's where it got even scarier. once they realized how special her cells were, they came back for her family. In some cases, lying to them in order to take blood samples. In some cases, being even more nefarious. Now, if you want to get more into this story, Oprah did a wonderful movie on this. I'll put a link in the show notes to the article that I referenced, as well as the movie, so that you can check it out for yourself and see just how far profit-motivated individuals are willing to go when they find out something unique about your DNA. So you're still not getting it? Still not quite understanding it? Still not believing me that Google, which owns 23andMe, which has also signed various partnerships with large pharmaceutical organizations and that are sharing your DNA profile data with them actively as you send in those kits to get all that really neat, fancy data back from them on what markers tell you you're related to, who people you're related to. Guys, that's just the fishing hook to catch you. Once they have it in the system, if you haven't gone in and explicitly told them they don't own your sample, they own it indefinitely. And I'm just giving you the good upside of what they'll do with it by profiting off of your DNA. When they start to track you, monitor you, profile you, and predict your future behavior with it, that's when this world is going to get extremely scary. Now, for those of you who really, really enjoy wild conspiracies, you need to check out my podcast, Event Horizon. I want you to specifically go in and check out episode 9, Catching the Golden State Killer, Exposing the Illuminati Plot to Find and or Create Jesus. I know you're saying, say what? Yeah. I go so far as to say that all of this drive to collect and create a global DNA database is an attempt to solve the biggest question on the planet. Has Jesus returned? If you have the spear of destiny, you have a sample of Jesus's blood that you can use to extract his DNA. And if you have a global database index, you can search and find a match. And if you have a match, you have the return of Christ. Now, that's potentially one way to use it. Another way to use it is to take the sample and create your own Messiah with the DNA as encoded on the spear of destiny. I'm not going to tell you everything that I talked through in that episode, but go check it out if you really like those kind of crazy conspiracies. But for right now, what we got to do is we have to educate ourselves on how this spider web is starting to be, how they're weaving this spider web. You got the commercial company slowly but surely convincing you that you got to submit a sample so that you can find all your relatives, and more importantly, so that they can find all your relatives. Those same companies, Google, are convincing you to play the little games where you put in a picture from when you were 20 years younger and one that is current. Guys, don't do that. I'm out of that. I come out of that industry. They're using that to build a facial recognition database. The two samples let them build aging algorithms so that they can predict how you and your kids are going to look as they get older. Stop doing that. Stop giving them the data that they need to track you everywhere on the planet. So the first step is we've got to educate ourselves on what they're doing, and then you got to pay attention to the fine print in the contracts. You can't turn over your DNA indefinitely and let them profit if there's something unique about you that can solve many of the health ailments in this world? See, today we're bashing Monsanto for doing that in the world of agriculture. 10 years from now, the pharmaceutical companies will be coming and telling us that they own our DNA. So stop it now. The second thing we got to do is, guys, we got to wake up. If they're taking DNA from people who have not committed crimes, they're basically saying these folks have no rights in this country. People who are seeking legal asylum, they're taking DNA. These aren't criminals. And if it's so easy to criminalize them, you're next. Just like in Virginia. Hey, let's expand the scope beyond just rape kits. Let's do it for all felonies. Let's do it for everyone the police pulls over. Let's do it for people who show up at Black Lives Matter rallies. Yeah, we can criminalize any group of people we want. Once criminalized, as in this case, because no new legislation, to my knowledge, has passed authorizing this, you only are left at the mercy of the people in the departments who oversee the system. And we know who oversees the FBI right now. The Justice Department, with a guy who, in my opinion, is playing fast and loose with the Constitution, in Bill Barr. So if he's playing fast and loose, and we get more guys like that, it won't be long before we will all be forced to submit a sample before you let your kids go to public school. I'm starting to hear these drums, and I'm already 2 minutes over my 15-minute limit, but I had to get that in. Happy New Year to you. 2020 is off to a scary start. But tune in here to the Mark Peterson Show, and we will keep you aware of some of the craziness that's going on. If you like this episode and like this show, hit subscribe, but share it with everybody you possibly can, because this is not something you got to keep quiet. If you like this show, you might want to check out Event Horizon. Guys, I go so deep in the rabbit hole on that show that sometimes it scares me. I have to go back and check myself. So if you like conspiracy, you like paranormal, you like digging down into these topics and then wrapping it in a biblical perspective, that might be the show for you. Till next time, guys, peace.
Hey you, podcast listener, this is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.